Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the latest Stephen King podcast, episode 39. I'm one of your co-hosts, Lou, and with me is my fellow co-host, Hans.
Hello, hello.
How are you doing?
I'm doing fine.
Awesome. And we're here to talk some more Stephen King, and we've got another full agenda that just can never seem to get caught up, which is good. It's hard to believe that we all worried at one time that we might run out of material to talk about, but that has not been a problem at all.
No.
So what we've got on the docket for this one is the latest King news, as well as we're going to be doing reviews of the revival. And we're going to have a dedicated discussion about a interview that the upcoming director of the new version of The Stand, Josh Boone, did with Kevin Smith over at Hollywood Babble On. So hope you enjoy that. But up first is the news.
Welcome, welcome. Do not fear the door that lies before you. We will protect you. We are your guides, Hans and Lou, and we will give you the latest in Stephen King news. But before we do so, you must prove yourself worthy. You must open the door and join us in the death room.
Yes, and the first news today is very sad news, and that is that the Stephen King expert, Rocky Woods, passed away this December 1st. And I guess most of us knew who Rocky was.
Mm-hmm.
I had the fortune to know him. I didn't meet him in person because he lived in Australia and I live in Sweden, so we were on the opposite side of the earth. But I had the privilege to talk to him a lot about Stephen King on email, and I know he was sick, but I didn't know he was as sick, so it took me by surprise that he passed away. It's a sad thing. He could have done much more, both as a human and contributed to the King community.
Mm-hmm. I too never met Rocky Wood, but of course I knew who he was. I know that besides his Stephen King work, he did a lot of stuff for the Horror Writers Association. He was the president at the time of his passing, and I knew he had ALS, or Lou Gehrig's disease. He had it for a couple of years now, and in a way, still kind of shocked when he passed. I heard the news that he had passed, but on the other hand, I seem to remember him having this for quite a while. So he put up definitely put up a valiant struggle. And the things that I take away from Rocky Wood is I never read a bad word about him on the internet. So he was well liked by everyone, which is quite a tribute. Never to read a disparaging word about somebody on the internet. So I think that's a testament to his character. And his Stephen King guide that he did, I have it at the online version of it, as well as the latest book that he did, the Uncollected King book.
Yeah.
Also a very interesting read. So if you don't have either one of those two books, I highly recommend it. The Stephen King guide is great because it, up to where it stayed current, it's a great reference guide for going up and quickly looking for stuff. And yeah, he'll be missed for sure. Seems like he was a very nice guy.
He's one of the few that I know has been to the Fogler Library and read. I don't know if he read everything, but I guess he's read most of the stuff there.
Right.
And I know King has to grant permission for people to go there.
Right.
So I guess King put a lot of trust in him.
Mm-hmm.
Because I don't think he
Absolutely.
wants everybody to read the stuff there.
Yeah. So a tip of a hat to Rocky Wood.
Yeah, definitely.
Moving on to movie news. First item up is a post that put up about the middle of November, and as the title of the article was, "Do we want a Running Man 2 movie?" And apparently Arnold was interviewed about this, and he said in an interview that he hears a lot about that movie. He related it to the Hunger Games, and he loves the idea. Of course, at his age, he's always looking to keep busy. I know he's just done a Terminator reboot, Terminator Genesis, and I actually saw the trailer, and I actually thought it was pretty good. It looks like a fun movie. So anyhow, he's talking about all up for doing a Running Man sequel. And what's your reaction on this, Hans, to this possibility?
I pretty much just laughed when I read it. I mean, I can't imagine anyone except Arnold wanting a sequel to this movie.
Yeah.
Because not only it only had about the title to connection with the book. So
right.
Even if you doesn't consider that it's based on the book, it wasn't very good either.
No.
So I don't see any reason to do a sequel to it, and I think that in the shape Arnold Schwarzenegger is now as an actor, I think he should stick to Terminator movies because those have a history, and they will probably work. But other than that, I think he should. I'll stick by saying that he should stick to the Terminator movies.
Yeah.
Leave the rest to be.
And no disrespect to Arnold, but at his age, how much running can he actually do anymore?
Yeah.
And my preference would be for a movie actually based on the book.
Yeah.
That follows it a lot more closer.
Yeah. Yeah, and that was Mass's thoughts as well on Facebook.
Right.
When I posted this question, that nobody really wanted a sequel to the existing movie, but a lot of people would like a movie that is true to the book.
Amen.
And if they would do that, I think that Arnold is definitely not the right person to play the lead.
Yep. All right. Yep. Good on you, Facebook responders.
Yep. Okay. Next up is the fact that The Stand, we have heard a lot about, is finally looking to be starting to filming soon. And it will be 4 movies instead of 2 movies. 1 movie. I think it was 1 3-hour movie at the start.
That's correct.
Yeah. And we will go deeper into this when we talk about the interview Josh Boone did with Kevin Smith later. So we can just mention now that this news is so big that it has actually reached Sweden.
Wow.
It's I think I can count on my fingers the number of times Stephen King news has gone on local radio or national radio here in Sweden. And this actually did.
Oh, yes, you did an interview for this, didn't you?
Yeah, I'm proud to say that it was me they talked to.
Awesome.
About it, yeah. So that was really cool.
And what was the interviewer's attitude about the 4 movies?
Yeah, well, they didn't really have an opinion. They were more asking if I thought it was a good idea and if I thought it would be better than the TV series, and they didn't like the ending of the TV series with the hand of God.
Well, that is from the book.
Yeah, it is from the book, and so they just asked things about it. They didn't really have an opinion. So.
Okay.
But it will be interesting, I think, and we'll talk more about that later on in the podcast.
Yeah. I'm very excited about it, so we'll be talking about that.
Yeah.
And we did a review for Big Driver that was out on the Lifetime channel in one of our previous podcasts, and now it is out on DVD. People still buy those things.
Yes. It will actually be out January 27th.
Yes, so apparently. So I'm assuming that it will be out on Blu-ray as well, or is there no...
I haven't seen any reports on Blu-ray, so it would be strange if it were only on DVD. But so far I've only seen a mention on DVD. So,
which is interesting. Yeah, you would think it would be on Blu-ray as well. But if you liked it well enough that you wanted to add it to your collection, then there you go. It will be out next year, January 27th, for you to pre-order. You can pre-order it now. I don't know if it comes with any special features. It's not really listing anything.
I don't think it's listed yet if there will be any special features. But I think both you and I can agree on that if you're only going to own a few movies on DVD, this is one of those that you can own because it was really good.
Yep.
Yes, and moving on, and this maybe some of you already know this, that if you have seen the final episode of Haven this season, is that William Shatner from Star Trek is going to be in the next season of Haven, or the next half of this season. We haven't decided yet. It's season 5 that continues, or if it will be season 6. But in the new episodes, he will appear, and we will be talking more about the last episodes of Haven next podcast.
That's right.
But he did he showed up a little in the last episode, so it will be interesting to see what he can bring to the show.
He showed up as a preview for what's coming up next, but yeah,
Yeah.
and that was a pretty funny sequence, I thought. It's a little, had 2-3 lines. It was pretty funny. When this news broke, this was a big surprise to me.
Yeah.
You know, Shatner obviously still works. It's hard to believe I think he's around 80 now, which is just kind of blows my mind. Him and Leonard Nimoy are still kicking around. You know, now there's even talk about him maybe being in the next Star Trek movie as well. So we'll have to see how that pans out. But yeah, William Shatner and Haven, that's going to be interesting, especially in light of what's just happened in the last couple of episodes, which we won't talk about yet since Hans hasn't seen them.
Nope. Not yet.
Okay, so more movie news. And this one's exciting, especially in light of the fact that the director attached to this next project has just earned a lot of claim for the work that he did on the True Detective series. And that is Cary Fukunaga, who is set to start filming the first of 2 movies based on the Stephen King novel It, which is probably 1-2 with a lot of fans as their favorite King book.
Yeah.
And the plan here, which is interesting, is the first film is going to deal with the kids, and then the second movie will deal with the adults. And the other interesting thing is apparently he's not signed to direct the second movie yet, which is interesting. But apparently that's how he likes to approach his projects. He only likes to be tied down to one project at a time, and he doesn't want to worry about the second movie yet. So we have to hope that he will be signed for the second movie, and that's just a formality. But at this point, he's focusing solely on the first movie.
Yeah, maybe it's a security way for him if the first movie flops totally.
Mm-hmm.
He could just walk away from it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's interesting to hear that they are going to do one about when they are kids and one where they are grown-ups.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's a very logical way to split the book, I think.
Yeah, it is. It's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, but I think that works very well when you see the 2 movies as a whole story.
Yeah.
But it will be interesting to see if it works with just the kids in one movie and just adults in one movie.
Mm-hmm.
Because they did it similar with the TV show. But well, I think that it could be a bit problem with not having a little of both when you do, because I'm only guessing, but I think that the first movie will be out and then the second will come like maybe a year or so after, as they do with the Lord of the Rings movies and stuff like that.
Right.
So there will be some time in between, and well, it will be, the movies has to work as standalone movies as well as together. So that will be interesting to see how that works.
Yeah, and I think that's why they're approaching it this way, because they want the early kids version portion of the story to stand on its own, and then if it doesn't do well enough, then it will be a fairly complete story. I'm sure they'll leave like threads dangling that will tie into the follow-up movie, but I like this approach. And the It miniseries flip-flop back and forth between the 2 eras. I'm hoping that with this approach we'll get a more sustained tone with each movie, because to jump from when these characters are adults and to kids and then back and forth, the viewer has to carry 2 different mindsets as he's viewing different parts of the story. But if you're all, for one part of the story, you're all with the kids, you can stay in that. And then when the second movie comes out, then it's a much more mature one. And it's nice because that way the story matures, like the way the Harry Potter books did, as with each year that they went back to school, the characters got older. In this one, we're going to have the same thing. So it's like a definite arc from a childhood to adult. So I think it's an interesting approach. I'm very excited for it, especially since even though I wasn't crazy about True Detective, I think the parts that worked really well were the dramatic tension, scary moments, especially the last episode when they were on the island. I thought that was really well staged and filmed. So I'm really hoping that he can do the same thing here with this story.
Yeah, and I think it's a way also, because since they are not doing the both movies at the same time and just releasing them differently, they don't have to worry about the kids being a year older and maybe looking different and stuff like that. So in that respect, it's a pretty good way to do it.
Yeah.
As well.
Yeah.
Okay, next up is some interesting news about the Talisman. And that is that hopefully, just a hope and a plan from the authors, is that King and Straw will write the next book, the third, next year.
Mm-hmm.
So that will be interesting to see what that is all about. I know a lot of people like the first book, The Talisman, but not so many like the second book.
I actually like I like Black House better myself. But
You did? Yeah. I think you're in the minority.
I believe I am. Yep.
Yeah, but I like them both. I remember I didn't really like that they were trying to tie it in with the Dark Tower.
Right.
Because I felt that it was a strong enough story to stand on its own, and not just being a sidekick to the Dark Tower.
Right.
I hope they will keep it in its own story. But maybe if it happened, they write it in the next year, and then maybe it's published the year after that. But it all depends on when they can do it.
Yeah, I know this one's caused a bit of consternation on some of the message boards and that, because it's the announcements been, by some camps has been labeled as premature, and just because King says he hopes that they're going to do it next year doesn't mean it's actually going to happen next year. I don't know what Peter Straub's got on his schedule. As far as I know, with King, he's got to write the third book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, but outside of that, he hasn't announced any other projects, so maybe they can start next year, but until we get an official announcement, all we can do is keep our fingers crossed. I mean, it's definitely enough time has passed that it's due and some people might say it's way overdue, but hopefully their schedules will mesh up next year, or at the latest the year after, that they will be able to write the third book. And yeah, this is probably one of the few series that is dangling and that a lot of fans want completed. It's kind of replaced the Dark Tower as the unfinished series for King fans.
Yeah. And speaking about the time in between books, between Talisman and the Black House, 17 years passed.
Wow.
If it would be published, the third book, in 2016, it will only have been 15 years.
So okay. So see, there you go.
It's still sooner than we got the second book. So
yeah. So if they're starting to talk about it again, then we're probably on track for this next book to come out 17 years again.
Yeah.
Between the second and third books. So there you go.
Yes.
Yeah. And our final news item, and it's another book-related item, is the second book in the Bill Hodges trilogy, or Mr. Mercedes trilogy, whichever way you want to call it. And the title for that one, as we reported in a previous podcast, is Finders Keepers. This has a very interesting storyline that actually has really piqued up my interest quite a bit, because there's a combination of misery and Lisi's story in here, in that it has to do with a character that was a big fan of a author and ended up buying his stuff and found that there's a unpublished story in it. But the manner in which he went around getting that story has caused him to be put in jail, and that book has ended up in the hands of somebody else. And now he wants to get that story back from this new person. So this sounds a lot like I said, a combination of misery and Lisi's story. And I think that when King writes stories about writers, they usually end up being his better stories. So this plot outline has really got me a lot more excited for the second book than I thought I was going to be originally.
Yeah, I agree. And it even says in the description of the book that not since Misery has King played with the notion of a reader whose obsession with a writer gets dangerous. So it's definitely in the same area as Misery.
Yeah, which is awesome. So
yeah, I'm really looking forward to this book.
So I'm really excited.
Yeah.
I mean, I was looking forward to the next Mercedes book or Bill Hodges book, but as I've mentioned previously, it seems to be, it's a more of a traditional crime detective type of fiction, which is not really one that I get that excited about. But this, combining it with this whole writer legacy element, really has me interested. So that's cool.
Yeah. Okay. Before we end the news section, I'd like to push for some stuff that's happening over at Lilja's library. And the first is that I have a contest where you can win a signed photo cast in Haven. All 4 of the main characters casts have signed photo. You can win that by describing a trouble. Illustrate a trouble is the contest. And I haven't drawn up any other rules than that. So as I have written on the site is that it could be anything from a song to a movie to a photo to a text, anything. So it'll be interesting to see. I have gotten a few entries so far, and it's looking interesting.
Cool.
So check that out if you're a Haven fan. Then also I have started a poll to see which book is the favorite among Stephen King fans. I did this back in 2012, and I said that I wanted to have 10,000 fans vote to get it somewhat in a little bit of numbers,
Mhm.
the voting, just to, if we got like 10 votes, it wouldn't mean that much. So, and since 2012, King has released 5 more books, so it would be interesting to see where those 5 lands on the list, and if the same book wins this year as it did 2 years ago.
You're going to have to
So
retire
head
it.
over. Sorry?
You'll have to retire it for the next one.
Yeah. So head over to the site and cast your vote. I think about almost 1,000 people have voted so far, so we need more votes for that. And the last thing is that I want you to send in your photos, a photo of yourself with the revival, as you did with when Mr. Mercedes was released. So far, a few people have sent in, not as many as with Mr. Mercedes. I haven't gotten the photo of you yet, Luke.
Yes, I'm sorry. I just realized that just reading this. I forgot about it.
Yeah.
You know what it is?
How-
It's just that the cover is so boring that I just don't really feel like taking a picture of it.
Yeah.
If I
And
had one of
still-
those other pictures like the one from Skytop, that's an awesome alternate cover that you showed. That would be a cool book cover to put up as a picture.
Yeah. So, but send in those photos. It will be interesting to see how many photos we can get. I know most of people have the book, so it should be easy to take a selfie today.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's it for the news today.
This is great. What's our job? We'd like drive around, pick up stiffs or what?
It's time for reviews from the night shift.
So we're moving on to a review of the latest Stephen King book, Revival.
Yes.
Revival is the story of 2 characters, basically, Jamie Morton and Charles Jacobs, and their paths keep crossing through the course of their lives, and it ends up in a pretty dark place by the end of the book. So I had a lot of expectations for this book, and I'm really curious, Hans, what did you think of Revival?
Well, as you, I had a lot of expectations for it. And, I mean, King went out and promoted this book by saying that it was the scariest thing he has written, and you better get, I don't exactly remember what he said, but get your nerves in order before you read it and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So I was expecting something like, maybe even worse than Pet Sematary.
Right.
And I must say, in that part, I was a bit disappointed, because only the last part, I think, was really scary.
Right.
And that is really too bad, because the book it's a very good book. It's a very good character descriptions in it, and the story is very good. So it feels unfair to be disappointed in it. But I think you got the wrong expectations from when they promoted the book from what you got.
Right.
And so even though it's a very good book, I was a bit disappointed in it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you totally. I think expectations by King himself, I think, misled us. Saying that this is the scariest thing he's ever written, I don't agree with that, like you.
No.
And also, even comparing it to Pet Sematary, I don't think is a fair comparison either. This book is really... The best way I can describe this book is it's unsettling. It's not a pleasurable... For me, this was not a enjoyable reading experience, not because the book was bad, but just because the story was, for a couple of reasons. But I think the one that most readers will identify with is the arc of the story is just, it's not a very comfortable thought. It's not something that you want to think about as you're going to sleep at night. It's a depressing, very bleak H.P. Lovecraft type of story ending. And because of that, it's not... For me, it wasn't an enjoyable read as compared to most other Stephen King books. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And the other aspect that was uncomfortable for me or kept distracting me was, even though specific events in the Jamie Morton's character growing up were not exactly the same as mine, but there was a lot of... I could relate to a lot of the things that he was going through, especially... And I think for a number of viewers, the whole, being brought up in a religious background and how you've run into experiences that cause you to drift away from that. I don't know if that's something that you've experienced growing up, Hans, if you grew up in a religious house and drifted away from that. But that happened to me, so that was uncomfortable. And obviously King has gone through this with his own mother, but what happened with his mother with the cancer, even though it's not a very large part of the book, for me, that was a period of my life that I went through with my mother, and that was like that was a terrible 2 years where she fought a losing battle with cancer. And so that that early part of the book really it made it difficult for me to enjoy the story because it hit too close to home for me. So that I think this is a unique situation probably just for myself that I will never have. I don't really have the desire to revisit this story because it's just not a comfortable story for me to read.
Yeah.
Besides the bleakness of the last half of the book. That's certainly not a slight against the writing in the book because I think it's written just as well as anything else he's done. Though I do have trouble with the two main characters. Jamie Morton to me is not as likable as some of his other characters. I don't know. Did you have that same issue, Hans? Or
No, first I want to say that I wasn't raised in a religious home, so I didn't have that problem.
Mm-hmm.
And as far as the bleakness go, I actually like that kind of stories, as you know. So, so that part, I'm almost allergic to when it's all sunshine and happy. So I like that part of the book actually.
Mm-hmm.
And I like that you didn't like the characters that much because that made them more real for me. Because often even if it's someone that you really like, they aren't likable all the time. So I actually thought that was kind of okay,
Mm-hmm.
And maybe even a good thing, and made the story stronger.
Right.
So I liked the story, and I liked the book, and I liked that it was a dark story with not much happiness and stuff like that. So it didn't bother me that it was a gloomy story.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I reread this book, which I probably will in maybe a couple of years, I think I will like it more by then, because then I won't have those expectations that I
Right.
had.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah.
Yeah, I find some comments that King actually wrote, and he said, the book coming in November, Revival, is a straight-ahead horror novel. If you're going to buy it, better tone up your nerves.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too scary. I don't even want to think about that book anymore. It's a nasty, dark piece of work. That's all I can tell you.
I agree with that part. It's a nasty, dark piece of work, but I don't agree with the scary part.
No, so again, it's a really good book, I think, and I think I will
Mhm.
like it a lot when I read it again.
Mm-hmm.
But the first time I won't say I had too high expectations. I just think that I had different expectations from what it actually gave me.
Right.
So that it was a bit sad that it was promoted as a straight up horror novel, because it was uncomfortable, as you say, and the ending was dark and somewhat horror, but I don't think it's a horror book in that meaning.
Yeah, I think the marketing on this book was misleading, and that's part of why our expectations were not met, because we were expecting a certain kind of story or tone to the story, and that's not really there. And because the last 30-40 pages are really pretty intense, but it takes the rest of the book to get to that point. The other thing that was interesting for me, there's two things about this book in regards to how scary it would have been. It would have been really interesting to see if King would have written this book like maybe 30 years ago.
Yeah.
Because I think the interesting part of the story is you can tell that this was written by an older writer, because he's taken this character through his childhood into his mid-50s, which is pretty well the age where I am. I'm pretty well the same age as the character of Jamie by the end of the book. So a lot of the things that character was reflecting on near the end of the book, I could relate to, because I'm going through those things right now. But because of that, if King would have kept the character in his, say, mid-30s or 40s or something like that, I think the story would have been more compressed and a lot scarier because of that.
Yeah.
And I think he's used the story to reflect on the three ages of manhood. Whereas if he was younger, obviously, he probably would have just stuck more to the horror of this Dr. Frankenstein kind of story. And the other thing that I thought would have been more scary is if the doctor, or if Jacobs was trying to actually talk to his wife, or if his wife had shown up at the end of the story or something like that, instead of this Cthulhu Lovecraft creature that we can't really relate to. And it's not like an It or anything like that. There was never a moment where the monster at the end was something that we could relate to. It was just powerful demigod demon thing. So it's an abstract concept as well. So
and I think the most scary thing at the ending was that the knowledge that was waiting for everyone when they passed away. I think that was the really scary part. Yeah,
and that's the dark, depressing part of the story. The uncomfortable part of the story, right? That there's nothing good on the other sides, which is interesting as well. So it's Yeah, it is a nasty, dark piece of work, but it's not scary until the very last 40 or 50 pages of the book. So again, I think it was a bit misrepresented to us. So it's an interesting book in a lot of ways because of my personal echoes of with the story, as well as where King is in his writing career. It would have been, again, really interesting to see him if he had written this, what this story would have been like if he would have written it 30 years ago. I think it would have been a much more Pet Sematary type of story.
Yeah, I agree.
But it's funny. I actually think I like Mr. Mercedes better than this book, which totally shocks me.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that. Which one of the ones you liked the best? Because you were really convinced before you read any of them that you would like this one the most of the two.
Yeah, I think at time, I think I will come to appreciate it more. But because of expectations and personal connections, I need to put some distance from this book and come back to it later.
Yeah.
Mr. Mercedes was a much more fun read.
Yeah, it was. And I must say that at the end of the book, when I pictured Jacobs, I almost always saw Mr. Burns from The Simpsons in front of me. And that wasn't really helping in getting it scary. So.
Yeah, I could see that.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, and I didn't want to have that image because I didn't think that was how he was supposed to look. So I was trying to block it out, but it came back every time. So.
And if there's one thing I really struggled with, and it's kind of interconnected, is the relationship between Morton and Jacobs. I didn't really understand why Jacobs was so taken by Jamie, and I tied into that. I didn't really understand why Jamie said he was curious, but I don't think that's strong enough motivation for him to stick around at the end like he did. But I don't know. No. I need that. Maybe that's something that'll work better for me on a reread. But that the core relationship between those two characters never really struck true to me.
No, and I think since Jacob said he needed Jamie to connect to the other side, and I am guessing that he didn't know about that until his family was killed and he tried to, when all this started.
Yeah.
But he was still very interested in him the first time he met him when he was just a little boy.
Right.
And why would he be that if he didn't know by then that he wanted him in later? So, yeah.
And the other niggle I have is that his brother, who Jacobs tricked into recovering his voice. I didn't understand why he went crazy and why Jamie was unaffected. Like, if anything, it would have been, you would think it would be the other way around, because this thing that he used on his brother was really just a gimmick. It wasn't really connected to electricity or anything like that.
Yeah.
Whereas what happened to Jamie was much more powerful than that. So that didn't make sense to me either. But I mean, it's a minor niggle. You just have to roll with it because of the characters. But looking at it logically, why did that brother, who he just basically used a joy buzzer on, go mad? And he got headphone treatment and he's fine. Like, that just doesn't make any sense to me. But yeah.
Well, everyone reacted differently to the exposure.
Right.
So maybe that was it.
I guess. Anyhow, that's our thoughts on it. It's definitely worth reading. I wouldn't put it in the top 10 King books by any stretch of the imagination. It would be in the middle somewhere for me.
Yeah. And if you feel different from Lou and think this is the best book King has written, then you can head over to Lilja's library and vote for it.
Mm-hmm. That's right. That's right.
And one other thing I have to mention about this book also, that is very fun for us Swedish fans, is that this was actually released in Sweden. I think it was about 7 or 8 days after it was released in the US. And we have never gotten a book so close to the US release date. We usually are at best a half a year, maybe even a year after, or even longer than that, to get the translation. So that was really fun. And King's new publisher, he changed publisher here in Sweden right before 11/22/63 was released, and they are taking much better care of him here now. So hopefully we'll see faster release dates for the books. So that's fun. Even if I still read in English, but it's fun that he gets the attention that he deserves.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
Yep.
All right.
Unfortunately, they used the US cover, so.
Well, can't have everything.
But you can't get him on.
Can't have everything.
No.
Okay, yeah. So, how about you? Where would you place this book generally in your ranking of King books?
Well, it wouldn't be in my top 5,
Mm-hmm.
Maybe in my top 10, maybe top 15 somewhere, I think.
Okay. Wow.
But I think I would have to reread it when my expectation is different.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think it is really a good book, and it's really well told, and most of the time the characters are well described. So I think it's a good
Right.
book, but a little injustice that we had the wrong expectation pulls it down right now.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
So it's a good book, but not the best one.
All right. Okay.
But I have to, and I agree with you that from this year's books, Mr. Mercedes is the better one.
Who would have thunk it?
Yep.
Just goes to show you never know, eh?
Yep.
Yeah. All right. So now we're going to move on to a deeper discussion about one of the items we mentioned in the news portion of the program, and that was the Josh Boone news about 4-movie version of The Stand. And I kind of bullied Hans into this one. So thanks, Hans, because if you look at that article in Hans's website on November 20th, and there's a link there where you can listen to the interview. And if you go over there, it's Kevin Smith, who you know from the Clerks movies, so forth, and he does a lot of public speaking, and he does his podcasts and whatnot. He also does one called Hollywood Babble On, and he had Josh Boone on there for almost 2 hours. So
Yeah.
we mentioned when we were talking about the revival tours interviews, the longer ones are usually the best ones, and this is no exception. And listening to this interview between Smith and Boone, I just got really, really excited and pumped about where the possibilities for what could happen with the Stand movie. Now, it's all talk at this point. I mean, the director Josh Boone has 2 movies out. The first one's Stuck in Love, and the second one was The Fault in Our Stars, which got pretty good buzz, which was a YA story about a bunch of teenage cancer victims that were terminal cancer victims. Stuck in Love has a King connection in that Boone got Stephen King to do a cameo, and I believe it was just an audio phone call cameo. I haven't seen the movie myself, but just listening to him talk about his take on Stephen King and his approach to The Stand just got me really excited. And one thing of precaution, I have to say that if you haven't heard the interview yet and you're going to listen to it, if you're easily offended by blue language, you have to be warned that this is not a safe for work type of audio podcast that you want to listen to without a pair of headphones on or whatnot, because there's a lot of swearing in it. And most of it's by Kevin Smith. If you know his shtick, then you know where he's coming from anyhow. I just got really excited about hearing somebody that as a director who I don't think outside of Frank Darabont has got such a seemingly solid grasp on Stephen King. Hans, you haven't had a chance to re-listen to the podcast. You're maybe a little fuzzy on some of the details.
Yeah.
But if you can just say in general, from what you remember about the podcast, did you walk away feeling excited about this potential version of The Stand?
Definitely. And I was just thinking that when you mention it, that you really get this the same vibe as you get from Frank Darabont.
Yeah.
With Josh Boone. So I think if we are right in our feelings, I think we can have if you can say that, a new Frank Darabont when it comes to King movies in Josh Boone. In not that he will be copying Frank Darabont, but that we have someone that really understands King's work and can turn it into good movies.
Yeah.
I think that's a good thing. And it's very interesting to listen to the podcast because they basically go through Josh Boone's entire life.
Yes.
Almost.
Yeah.
Starting from how he began as a film reviewer and moved on and did movies in school and stuff like that. And he wrote a letter to King explaining how he felt and sent a couple of books for him to sign.
Yeah, King
signed those.
Yeah, the first 3 Dark Tower novels.
Yeah, and King signed those and even included a new book that that Josh didn't send him, that King sent on his own. And he wrote like a letter that continued in the 4 books and stuff like that. So he must have been in heaven when he got those things.
Yeah.
But I think it's really someone who understands King's work. And if given the right means by money and actors and stuff, I think he can do really, really good movies.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm really excited about The Stand because it feels like the studio is really investing in this and they are giving him a really lot of money to do this. And based on his on the 3-hour script that he wrote, they asked him if he could do like 4 movies instead. So this came from the studio, and so he must have been impressed them a lot with the 3-hour script.
Yes. Let's just sort of run through a couple of these points in a little more detail. I want to start out, like you mentioned, with Boone has developed a relationship with King over the years, starting at when he was a teenager, I guess, and sent a bunch of Dark Tower books for King to sign. And the interesting thing is that his parents at the time, who sort of went through like a reverse out of sort of like an atheist to born again Christian life cycle, didn't want him reading King books anymore. At first they encouraged him to read them, and then later on they turned and they didn't want him. He basically said he had a copy of The Stand hidden in, I think he slept in bunk beds or something, and he had like the Stand hidden in the mattress above him or whatever. So
yeah.
But once King sent him back the books that he had sent signed, his parents were blown away by that and let him develop his love for King. And the cool thing about this is that it continued to the point where he was able to get King to do a cameo, as I mentioned earlier, in his first movie, Stuck in Love, where he phone calls a character who's playing a writer in here, and King sort of gives him a pep talk about continuing on. And from there, I think after Stuck in Love, King actually wanted Boone to direct Lisey's story.
Lisey's story.
Yeah,
that's correct.
Which King says King always references it as his favorite book, and Boone was on board with doing that. But then the studio came to him and said, "Would you be interested in doing The Stand?" And he said, "No," because he said there's no way you could do it in one movie or whatever. But they talked him into it, and he came up with a script that would work within a 3-hour format. And he said that how he got around that was able to pack all the highlights of The Stand into it, as he did it in a non-linear fashion. And actually the movie would have started with Mother Abigail and then reflecting back on the things that happened in The Stand. So whatever happens, if they go to this 4-movie format, I hope at some point we get to see a copy. Maybe it'll be like a special feature on one of the Blu-rays if we ever get to stand out on Blu-ray from this. That I hope that he will make this original version of his story available for us to read, because I would just be fascinated to see how he did that.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah.
And well, it's fascinating because I think it's an interesting idea to do it that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that probably as many as would like it would dislike it. So
Mm-hmm.
it would probably be a divider in the King community, because some people will think it's a new and fresh way to tell the story, and others would just hate it because it didn't follow the book. I think he would have had a hard fight to fight for it, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it would have worked maybe.
Yeah. And the funny thing was he handed in the script, and the budget for that movie was set at $87 million, and the studio wanted to actually increase the budget because they wanted him to include some big action set pieces in the movie. And their reasoning for that, and this is where I'd like to get your feedback on this, Hans, because I find this very curious, is in order to sell the movie internationally, they feel they need to have these big action set pieces, which I guess they can use to promote the movie. And I find that a very curious position by the studio. And maybe this is something that you're not really aware of as well, but do movies need to have big action set pieces to be successful in Europe?
No, I don't think so. I think that if it's movies that's targeting like teenagers, of course they are going to sell better if there's Arnold Schwarzenegger character blowing stuff away all the time,
Mm-hmm.
instead of two people just sitting around talking.
All right.
So maybe that was one of the reasons if they want to target a younger audience. But
Right.
I haven't experienced that you have to have action in movies to make them big in at least not in Sweden or Scandinavia. I can't really speak for the rest of Europe, but
Right.
it's not my opinion that it has to be.
Right.
But maybe they have done research and maybe action movies sells better and are bigger successes than non-action movies.
Well, yeah, because like if you look what happened to World War Z with Brad Pitt, that movie has very little to do with the book, but
Yeah, definitely.
But they can sell those shots of the zombies climbing up the walls and trying to get up onto the helicopter and stuff like that. But I just thought that was an interesting, a bit of, I'm assuming, market analysis that the studios have about how to promote movies internationally. And This is actually at the point of the interview where I started to get really excited because Boone flat out told the studio, no way, The Stand is not that kind of story. It doesn't have big action set pieces. It's really a bunch of interconnected character stories. Yes, we have the iconic Lincoln Tunnel scene, but that's really, and except for the final showdown in Las Vegas, there's not any really big action set pieces in The Stand. It's all character moments, and Boone gets that, and that's the version of, and he was also talking about how even though there was a lot of great horror movies done in the 80s, he said horror movies as a serious movie genre has diminished as the studios turn out these quick franchises, Saw type, Freddy and Jason type movies. But he sees The Stand as really a dramatic story, and it sounded like he had some actors already lined up that were interested in doing some of these roles. I mean, the big rumor going around is Matthew McConaughey as Randall Flagg, which would be an interesting take. I would like them to go back to the source material and make it physically match the description of the character in the book a bit more, but for the purposes of a movie to sell it, I don't think you could do any better than Matthew McConaughey right now.
No.
He would definitely sell it. But his take on The Stand, just listening to him to talk about it and, say there's no big action set pieces in this movie and it's all about these characters, and talking about he wants to film those scenes with Mother Abigail going through the corn, fighting off the weasels and all that kind of stuff. Like I was just getting goosebumps listening to him talk about it, because this is the stuff I want to see too. That wasn't really covered in the miniseries. So it's kind of funny reading reactions to this, because the first thing you hear people saying, "Oh, a 3-hour movie, that's not enough time to tell The Stand." Now that they made the announcement for 4 movies, people are saying this is, well, that's too many movies. And I'm just going like, you can't win.
You can't win, though.
Because what's your feeling? Is 4 movies too many?
Well, it depends on how they are done. And I mean, it could be like 4 1.5-hour movies, or it could be like 4 3-hour movies.
Right.
And that would make a huge difference in the total. So I definitely think it could be done, and I think it could be done very good. And I think the story could, since he wants to tell the story and not make it an action-filled movie, he wants to tell the story. And I think to do that, you have to have a lot of time.
Yeah, because character building takes time.
Yeah, and you have to you have to do it so that people doesn't lose interest in them.
Yep.
And think the movie gets slow and boring. So he definitely has a challenge to do that. But I think if you're going to tell the character story and you're going to build the characters, you're going to need to have time.
Yeah.
And you're going to need to have to find a way to tell it without making it slow and boring. So if you do it right, I think it could be great.
Yeah.
And I must say that, as you said, that he said no to the studio about having those big scenes. You have to consider also that this is fairly young director, and he only has 2 movies out.
Yep.
And I must say that I think that there's many more established directors that wouldn't have been so brave to say no to a studio. I mean, they could just have left it and gone to someone else.
Yeah.
But even so, he stood up for his opinions on the movie, and I think that's very admirable that he does that, and that I think also is showing that he wants to tell King's story as it is and as it is meant to be told.
Yeah.
And not just making the movie that the studio think can sell the most.
Yeah, he wants to make a serious movie. Like, he wants to get big name stars. He wants to make this. He's treating it as a straight drama, which is fantastic. And that's the attitude, or it's not the attitude, but it just shows that his grasp of the King material is spot on. Like, he talked about how much he admires John Carpenter's Christine, but he says that movie totally lost the story. I mean, he says he loves the way Carpenter frames that, but that was a story about being alone and being alienated, and he basically turned it into a killer car movie, right?
Yeah.
So he gets it, and he says the same thing about, he loves Kubrick's version of The Shining, but he says that is not the King's story as well.
No.
So and I think that's his favorite book, actually. And he says when he gets old and maybe his last movie, he would love to do, maybe he could do The Shining again.
Yeah.
The definitive version, which is interesting. And he never, maybe purposely, he never referenced the King miniseries, which was closer to the book, but it just, again, to me, there's some miscasting there with the kid actor. And he talked about the same thing, like with The Stand, the miniseries. Like, he said he loved that growing up, but over time he realized that some characters were miscast and that was kind of done on the cheap. It doesn't feel like the event that it should be. Like it needs that cinematic budget for it to work properly. Right?
Yeah.
So everything that he was talking about related to Stephen King was just getting me really, really excited. And I can see 4 movies easy. Like the first movie would be Captain Trips. The second movie would just be the characters migrating to either Colorado or Las Vegas. The third movie would be the drawing of the battle lines between Mother Abigail and Randall Flagg. And then the fourth movie would be the final standoff in Las Vegas. And I can't see how people could not be excited to see 4 movies like that, especially like if they're willing to put up with 5 seasons of The Walking Dead where the characters are just going in circles, not going anywhere. You know what I mean? Like I don't get that mentality that, oh, that 4 movies is too many. But you're watching 5 seasons of The Walking Dead and they're not getting anywhere. And The Stand has a definite start and finish.
Yeah.
And it's going to tell a story. I think obviously there's some backsplash from like recently with the Hunger Games, splitting that last movie into 2, or the Harry Potter 7th book making it 2 movies. I can understand that, or the Hobbit making that into 3 movies when that's a really slim book. But we're talking like a 1,000-page book.
Yeah.
And most 2-hour movies are like the script is 120 pages. Are you telling me that they cannot make 4 movies out of 1,000 page? I don't see the issue there at all with that as far as that goes.
No.
You'll have to cut out a lot of stuff. So
yeah, I think so as well. I mean, I don't know. I think it was in the miniseries. I think it's like 125 speaking roles in it. So
yeah,
I mean, we're talking a lot of characters.
Yeah.
And we don't know really much about how this 4 movies will be done, but I hope that they are doing it similar to Lord of the Rings and Hobbits, that they are recording them or shooting them all at the same time, so that they will all be more or less done when the first is released, and all 4 won't be ready at the same time, of course, but they just shoot one and wait to see if it's a success or not, and then do the second and third and fourth. So I hope they do them all 4 at the same time. And I think they have to do that as well, since too much time will pass, and the actors and actresses will grow, be older and change. So I think it would have to be shot at the same time, all 4 movies. But we don't know much about that yet. So
yeah, I suspect that the first movie will be done standalone because, as far as I know, they're still on schedule to start filming next year. So he has to rework his 3-hour script to at least to have enough material for the first movie. And plus, that way they can hedge their bets. If the first movie doesn't do well, then they would probably stop. But if it does well enough, then I would think you would see them start to film the second, third, and fourth movie probably all together. Or maybe the second and half of the third, and then the third and fourth together is like that. But no, I don't think you're going to get to film the whole thing all at once, not right off the bat. I think they'll just do the first script by itself, and then based on the reaction to that, they'll look at doing simultaneous shootings of both of the other 3 movies. But we'll have to see. I just hope that this switch from the 3-hour to the 4-hour movie is going to still has enough time for him to be ready to start shooting next year. You know, even if he starts shooting next year, it's still going to be like another year or 2 before we get the first movie. So
yeah. And about actors and actresses being cast, I actually asked him about that, and he said that nothing is set.
Right.
So there might be discussions with different actors or actresses, but no one has actually been officially cast yet. Yeah. No.
All right.
So,
okay. Because you sort of got inference from his podcast interview that he actually did have some cast already ready to go. So, but it's good that you've got that clarification.
Yeah, he might have some, but I don't think anyone has signed on. They might be in talks and almost, but I don't think anyone has signed yet on.
Okay.
So, but it could have changed by now, of course.
Sure.
It was a couple of weeks since I talked to him.
Right.
But so far, as I know, no one has been casted yet.
Right.
So, but it will be a lot of casting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So, needless to say, if you haven't got it from my tone during this this portion of the podcast, I'm really excited about the potential for this version of The Stand turning out to be something really special.
Yeah.
Obviously, it's just all based on what I heard in that podcast. But if you listen to him talk about all the Stephen King properties, not just The Stand, he totally gets these stories. Like he gets the core of what makes each one of these stories work. So, and you could in general look at the King stories, and there's a tendency to want to have like these big action scenes instead of the character building up the character moments, which I think is one of the reasons a lot of the adaptations don't work. And the ones that do work are the ones that get the character moments right. So yeah, I'm really hopeful and excited that this is going to come to fruition, and with the vision that Boone was giving us from his interview with Kevin Smith.
Yeah, there's as I can see it, there's only one downside with this 4-movie deal for The Stand, and that is that it will be even longer than until we can see Lizzie's story being filmed.
Right.
Because I think that won't happen until The Stand is done. So
well, I was under the impression that he was basically going to give that story up, because if he's going to do The Stand 4 movies, I think after that he'll want to do something totally different than Stephen King, because I know he's a big Dark Tower fan too, and I'm kind of thinking, well, but like, do you want to make a career out of making Stephen King movies? If he's going to do this, I don't think he'll do another Stephen King property for a long time if he ends up doing all 4 movies. And he might only direct 1 or 2, and they might have another director come in for the other ones, right?
Yeah, but look at Frank Darabont. He had the smallest, kind of movies. He did like only Stephen King prison movies.
Right.
When he did Shawshank and The Green Mile. So, and he was very successful with doing Stephen King movies. He did a couple fairly close to each other.
Yeah.
So.
Well, he did The Majestic as well, but yeah.
Yeah. So, but I think Boone will do a great job with Lizzie's story as well. So I'm a bit sad if we won't get that one, but I guess 4 movies with The Stand will have to do.
Yeah. Because he sounds like he would be a good candidate for the Dark Tower, but there's no way I can see him doing that after doing The Stand. That would be way too much for any one person to. That's too much of one writer to keep adapting. I'm sure he wants to do if he does do 4 movies of The Stand, he'll want to do probably the smallest type of love story, romantic comedy movie that he can do, or a comedy or something like that. Just to clean his palate, to do something different.
But I mean, look at Peter Jackson. He did Lord of the Rings and then Hobbit. So
yeah, he didn't want to do The Hobbit either.
No, but he still did. So
well, somebody had to do it, right? Yeah, but
yep.
But now, is that all Peter Jackson's going to be able to do? Like, what does he do after this?
Yeah,
it'll be interesting to see, because he hasn't really proven himself to be nearly as successful with his other projects as he has with Tolkien material.
No, it will be interesting to see where it goes from here.
So that's our thoughts on this interview. I hope you enjoyed it. Lots of stuff there. I hope you don't mind if I got a little too passionate, and I want to thank Hans for allowing us to talk about this, because I was very excited about it, so I wanted to talk about it, that interview, in a lot more depth.
Yeah. And please, if you have opinions about this 4-movie deal, if you agree with us that it will be a good thing, or if you disagree and think it will be a bad idea, please comment, tell us why and what you think about it, because it's interesting to hear what others think. Some of you might not be as excited as Lou and me, and some might even be more excited, so let us know.
Yep, for sure. So that wraps up this podcast. Hans, what do we got on tap for our next one?
Yes, on the next one, we are going to talk about the last episodes of Haven. So make sure you finish season 5 before the next podcast, so you can follow us, hear what we think about them. We are also going to review Mercy, the Stephen King movie based on Grandma that was released earlier this year. And we are going to talk a bit about what we can expect from Stephen King in 2015. So far we know 2 books at least, and probably a couple movies as well. So we'll talk more about that in the next podcast.
Yep. All right. Maybe even a little bit of horns.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of horns as well.
Okay, so hope you all enjoyed that. And until our next podcast,
stay safe.
But
stay scared.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest installment of the Lilja and Lou podcast. I'm one of your co-hosts, Lou, and with me is my other co-host, Hans.
Yep. Sorry, it's a Stephen King podcast.
Oh, okay. Start over. Start over.
Yeah.